Welcome to the Business of Story, where we connect you with the leading minds in the art of business storytelling. Learn from best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, makers, content marketers, and brand raconteurs on how to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. The Business of Story is brought to you by Emma, which provides innovative email marketing tools and services that drive brilliant results. And by Convince and Convert, digital marketing advisors and counselors to leading brands and organizations worldwide. Convince and Convert helps you gain and keep your customers online. Here's your host, Park Howell.
Hey, welcome back to Business of Story. Park Howell here. Great to have you back here with us for another edition of our fine program. And I am really excited today about our guest because it's actually someone who caught my attention a few years ago, and I loved what he was doing back then in really disrupting the status quo in a really interesting industry. They reached out to me earlier this year and said, hey, we'd love to have him on the show. And I thought, dang, why didn't I think about that? Because I was so fascinated by the work they had already been doing. And you know me, in brand story strategy, I'm really big on, we cover a lot about having to find story tension, the conflict in every story, and that you don't want to be selling into the status quo because there's only really one company that does that really, really well, and that's Walmart. And it's hard to compete with the likes of Walmart no matter what you're selling. And you know what? The margins just aren't there, so you got to make them up in volume. That's where disruption comes in. Now, really smart brands and the stories that they are authoring that their people can live into and prosper from are always looking for the tension in the market that they can then move into and help their customers and clients bridge that gap. And without that tension, you know, it's really hard to continue to grow an enterprise. So sometimes that is an external tension, is an external market disruption that you are responding to that makes you more timely, urgent, and relatable than your competition, or you have to be the disruptor. And we have that disruptor on our show today. Now, let me ask you, when was the last time you went to a museum and you really dug it? I mean, like you were there like, I'm all in, this is the coolest thing. And if you're not, like totally into museums, it's hard. I mean, I have that same thing. I go into them, I'll appreciate the first few pieces of art I see or the sculpture or whatever. And that's really nice. But I get gallery fatigue in a hurry. And you know what? I'm not alone. So our guest today did something really remarkable. His name is Nick Gray, and he is the founder of Museum Hack. Just over 4 or 5 years ago, he went into a museum, was not having the greatest time until his date started making it really interesting for him. And then it grew from there. And now Nick and his company, his group at Museum Hack, and how they have made experiencing a museum so novel and so interesting and so much more fun than it used to be. Well, they're sought after around the country by companies to help them understand how they can do that and help their people live into that same kind of story. So on today's show, Nick is joining us, and we're going to be covering a number of things, but I want the areas that I want you to really be paying attention to. I guess I'm sort of the docent of this show right now, is we're going to talk about the 3 things that Museum Hack did to disrupt the museum experience and make it way more interesting. And these are 3 things that you can be doing in your own business or with your own clients. Number 2, Nick and I, we are going to be talking about how to overcome gallery fatigue through storytelling. Now, it's not just gallery fatigue, it's business fatigue, it's doing the same old thing fatigue, it's bringing people in and touring them through your plant and your processes fatigue. How can you rethink that, shape people out of the status quo, and have some fun doing it, just like Nick and his team have proved that they can do it in the finest art museums? And then finally, you're going to learn today what businesses can learn from Nick on how that you can use the gallery hack to sell this adventure and not a tour. So Museum Hack approaches this as not giving you a museum tour, but a museum adventure, and how you can bring that adventure, again, through storytelling, through the experiences, and having some fun. Let your hair down and have some fun with it. So I'm so tickled today to have Nick here on Business of Story, and let's get this let's get this adventure going right now. Hey, Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Man, it is so great to have you here. Joe from your office reached out. I had heard about you guys a couple years ago, and I was just blown away with what you're doing with Museum Hack. So when he reached out and said, hey, man, we got Nick here available for you, I circled back and I thought, why didn't I think about this sooner? So it's just really awesome to have you here.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here. This is so cool. A whole podcast around storytelling. I love it.
Well, you've built a small little cottage industry with museums around storytelling, Museum Hack. How did you get into this? Tell us, what's your origin story?
My origin story with Museum Hack is maybe different from some other businesses you've heard about. Oh, and by the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you don't like art and you don't like museums, trust me, I am with you. I am in the same boat. I kind of hate museums because they always make me feel tired and sleepy, and I don't know what to think about the art. But all that for me changed about 5 years ago when this woman took me on a date to the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York City. I live in New York now, yeah. And so that date for me was what spurned this idea and started my love affair with museums.
Well, what happened? Something must have really gone down there.
Yeah. It was our third date. It was in the middle of December. And here in New York, it was very cold. It happened to be snowing that night. It was a third date, so she was planning it, and she had said, oh, what if we go to the Met? I was like, okay, I'd been there before, but like as a New Yorker, the Met is really, it feels like Times Square. It's like the place you go when your parents are in town. Mm-hmm. Not like a place to go hang out on a date. But I said yes, and she brought me there and basically proceeded to give me a tour of her favorite things. She showed me sculpture and paintings and artifacts, Egyptian mummies and American furniture. And she just showed me cool things that she liked. And she didn't talk to me like I was some, super fancy person. It was just like friend to friend. And for me, that experience really unlocked a sense of curiosity that I started to have for museums and art and history. And I tell you what, after that tour, I started going back to the museum like every weekend, and I would do the YouTube videos, I'd do the audio tours, I'd buy the guidebook. I did everything I could. I became obsessed with the museum and eventually started to give free tours for my friends, and that's where this business came out of.
Okay, so let's go back to that magical evening at the Met. So was there one item that you remember? She's showing you all these different artifacts and these masterpieces and whatever. Is there one in particular that stands out in your mind that finally flipped that switch with you?
I remember there was this room. It was called a period room, which is a room that's kept almost exactly as it would have been at that period in time. And this was a room from like the 1780s and this beautiful mansion in Vienna. And I remember walking into the space. It was beautifully lit. There's a harp in the background, a desk, nice Rococo gold flowy furniture and accoutrements. And I felt so fancy. I felt so... I was like, wow, most Friday or Saturday nights, I'm at like a dive bar in Brooklyn. And here I'm in this palatial room from the 1780s. For me, that was like, wow, museums are freaking awesome.
So then what happened? All right, so that flipped the switch. You start going and hitting museums. Now what?
I started going to the museums as much as I could, and my sister was in town one summer. My sister and our friend Will, and I said, you know what? Why don't I show you around the museum? I've been spending so much time here. I'll give you some little tour. And I had so much fun doing it. I got to tell you, I just loved it that I started inviting more of my friends. You know what? None of my friends would go to the museum with me. They were like, you're a business guy, not a tour guide. So I had to do something. I had to trick them into letting me be a tour guide. And so I threw my birthday party at the museum because, right, it's your birthday. Your friends have to do whatever you want them to do on your birthday. And that really was the first weekend that I was like really a tour guide.
Okay, so did they think you had just totally flipped over this woman, and so therefore you've taken on this whole museum docent, persona to impress her? Or were they like, man, Nick's not hanging out in the dive bars anymore. He's really serious about this stuff.
My friends are they've been good with the various things that I've gotten excited about and interested in over the years, and I'm very thankful that they were really supportive of this hobby.
So did you have a background in the arts and museum and that kind of thing? I mean, a little bit before you got into this?
No background in the arts, never taken an art history class, was a business major, used to work in marketing and sales. At the time of doing these tours, right, for fun, I sold, at that time, avionics equipment for small jets and military planes. This was just something I did for fun on the weekend as a hobby.
So this is 4 years ago you started getting Museum Hack going?
Yeah, about 4.5, 5 years ago was when that birthday party was, which was awesome.
All right. So then when did it become a thing? I mean, like, you're not just traipsing around your sister there and friends just aren't showing up for your birthday. When did people start reaching out to you like, dude, I want a tour?
The inflection point for me was when this one blog wrote about us. And I'd been doing tours for my friends, and my friends would tell their friends, and their friends would tell their friends. And it was like a manageable trickle where I could keep busy. I'd do 2 tours every weekend for about 10 or 15 people each time. But then this one blog wrote about my tours, and it was called Daily Candy. And the next day after the blog post came out, I kid you not, 1,000 people emailed me. It was like 1,200.
So that blog is like an artifact now in your Museum Hack life. We will have a link in our show notes so people can go and gaze upon it and wonder and how it's changed history. So what do you think it was about that sent 1,000 people to you?
It was a legit amazing tour, and it still is. We do these awesome tours, and there'd never been a museum tour done in this style before, right? We take a very fast-paced way to basically run through the museum, and it's spoken in a way that's not too sophisticated. Our target market is someone who doesn't really like museums.
So you're pulling out the museum ogres, huh?
Exactly.
You are going to hate this until you find out that, as your website says, it's effing awesome. Museums are effing awesome. So what do you do to make that experience that awesome?
There are 3 main things that we do that I believe make our tours very different from other museum tours. 3 main things comes down to guides, games, and gossip. Those are the 3 G's in my mind.
Guides, games, and gossip. So the guides got to be pretty special. How do you go about tracking them?
Our guides are really special. We've got scientists and actors. We have musicians, former museum employees. We post our job ads all over the cities that we operate in. And then we cast as wide a net as possible. Usually we'll have hundreds of applicants for 1 or 2 open jobs. And what sets us apart is instead of doing job interviews, we do job auditions. Huh. And within the theater world, this makes sense. But in the museum space, I think this was a real revolutionary idea. So yeah, we have casting calls, and that helps us immediately see how engaging somebody is.
So take me through an audition. So I'm a guy, I show up, and I say, Nick, I live in Phoenix. I'm willing to commute. I want to come out to Museum Hack. What do I got to do in my audition to get hired?
Okay, the first audition, when I was running the auditions, is that we would group everybody up and we'd split them into groups of 10, and one of the tour guides, like myself, would say, let's go into this gallery. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to find a piece that you like and research it using your smartphone. And now you have to be able to talk about it for about 90 seconds or so. And then we're all going to link up and you do it. So it's spontaneous. Nobody knows what to expect. We ask them to dress kind of nice, and they meet us at the museum. And then spontaneously, they have to pick a piece in a gallery that we've chosen, and they have to talk about it in an engaging way. And we watch them when they talk to see how their body language is, how comfortable are they, what type of confidence do they speak with, do they engage with the audience. After that, if you get invited for a callback, then we give you time. We say, look, spend a little bit of time, research and work on this piece, this one particular painting, and come up with your own unique or custom story that's about 2 or 3 minutes long. And that's what they do.
And so then they got to tell you the story. So this sounds like it's a combination of kind of docent meets improv artist meets art student.
Nailed it. Yeah, meets stand-up comedian.
Meet stand-up comedian. I got to tell you, I saw this in action, not through you. I'm going to get all fancy on you now because I'm going to tell you about the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, so I hope you're really, really impressed with me.
Nice.
Actually, we go out to Amsterdam every year with a storytelling class that I work with at Arizona State University. But last year, we were at the Rijks, and, it is just like this phenomenal collection of art, history, Rembrandt's, the Night's Watch is in there, and it's all its glory. It's like 22 feet tall. I mean, it's just really amazing. Well, we were in there, and they assigned us to this docent who was the most amazing tour guide I've ever seen. He was literally like a cross between a PhD art aficionado and Jerry Seinfeld. Oh. And in fact, for you listeners, I sent Nick some photos that I've taken when my wife and I have gone to these wonderful museums, because I get that gallery fatigue. I can only look at masters for so long, and then I start taking pictures of all the people around and trying to capture that story of the human interaction with the museum. But this was the guy I sent you where he's pointing right at the camera, and behind him is this big ship. And I got to tell you, Nick, I was so fascinated with him for 2 hours. I didn't open my mouth once. I just listened, and this guy took me through it. And all I could think of is it had to have been somewhat similar to what you are doing with Museum Hack, because he was not boring in any way, shape, or form. He would tell these, great stories behind all the pieces, incorporating the artists into it, tell you, if they were drunkards or not, and fighters. I mean, it was just really, really incredible. So I imagine that's kind of the person you're looking for with your guides as well.
Exactly. Sounds like you had an awesome tour guide at that museum. And there are so many great tour guides out there in the world. What my company does is we just standardize and systematize that so that you are guaranteed getting the best tour guides when you book with us.
How many guides do you have working at Museum Hack?
It's hard to say. We're in a couple cities now. I'd say we have maybe 20 or 30. We're in New York City. We're in Chicago. We're in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco.
Yeah. All right. So guides, of course, are really key. You also said games. Now, how do you make visiting a museum games, game-like?
Yeah, games are important to us. I'm a part of this ADD generation that's always checking my smartphone, who, very short attention span, want things to move very quickly. So the first game we play is just by moving fast. Our tours on average are 2 to 3 times as fast as most museum tours, and that's very helpful for us to keep people engaged and entertained. We'll do things like at the very beginning, we do like a sports cheer to kind of kick off the event and to unify the team. Give me an example of a sports cheer. How do you do a sports cheer? A sports cheer would be like the guide would say, listen, everybody, there are 3 million objects on display here. I can't show you all of them, but I'm going to show you my favorites. We need to be unified as a team because we're going to move so fast. And so everybody put their hands in the middle. So everybody puts their hands in the middle. They all circle up. And then he says, all right, we're going to say the word museum, like down on mu, up on zeum, like museum. And he says, we're going to say that, and then we're going to run or walk quickly into the museum. And so everybody looks at are we really doing this? And sure enough, they all put their hands in and everybody goes, museum. And that's how the tour begins. Every single Museum Hack tour, that's how it begins. P.T. Barnum in his day would have loved you, because back in 1941, he sort of took over the museum concept and he made it sort of half museum, half circus. He would have all kinds of oddities in there. He would have the bearded lady. He had this thing that he said was, "Is this a mermaid?" And it was like a dead carp sewn to a monkey's head, and that was the museum of the day. So they were trying to bring in both the Bowery sect and the elite and bring them in and show them, it might be a Rembrandt or a master in one room, and the next room it might be a 26-inch tall dude walking around. So I love it.
He would love, yeah. I had no idea that museums were kind of that much of an entertainment destination back then, where we got all prim and proper, like you said, all fancy in this day and age with them, and you do get that gallery fatigue. So, how do you overcome gallery fatigue with your guests?
Overcoming gallery fatigue is not easy. While I'm thinking about it, you may enjoy looking up the origins of museums, which were these things called cabinets of curiosity. Have you heard of these before?
A little bit. And I can tell you right now, Nick, my favorite museum of all time is literally a tourist trap in Seattle, Washington called the Ye Old Curiosity Shop. And we went in there as kids, and I don't think they must not have sold one thing, because it looks exactly the same now when I go back there 4 decades later. And they've got shrunken heads, and they got stuffed monkeys. They even have an orca whale penis in there. So, I mean, the Ye Old Curiosity Shop. So it sounds like the same kind of thing you're talking about.
Same idea, right? Where it was natural history mixed with art objects that would be collected in individuals' homes, in like wooden box crates, essentially, that were all stacked up. Obviously much nicer, but lots of weird sort of oddities, and that's where museums came from. I love that idea. How we got started, though, is we were talking about gallery fatigue. How do you prohibit gallery fatigue? The best piece of advice that I have for somebody that you could use now on your next museum visit is, when you first go to a new museum, I suggest walking the entire floor plan first. Walking around, like not stopping to read the labels, not stopping to look at the art, but simply just walk around. It should take you 10 to 30 minutes. And use that time to build a mental model of the space itself and, subtly remember the pieces that maybe jump out to you. After that, I love going to the cafe. I have a cup of tea or some coffee or maybe a sweet treat. And then when I'm recharged, when I'm ready, that's when I go into the museum, and that's when I start to have my time. What our guides do on the tour is they move it fast. They pass out chocolate. They hand out candy. They'll do espresso shots in the cafeteria or drink some wine on our nighttime tours. And these are tips and tricks that we use to break up the gallery fatigue.
And I saw that you were doing yoga in some of the locations. I mean,
yes, we do.
The video you got on your site.
In the modern and contemporary, yeah.
That's great. So your third part of this differentiation is gossip, and I got to believe that has to be about storytelling.
Oh, heck yes. Gossip is my favorite one of all three. And when I say gossip, what I mean is the juicy backstories, right? I mean how much these paintings cost when the museum purchased them. I want to know, who did they buy it from? What were the trading details of that? I want to know, was this artist a drunkard? Was this artist in love with this other artist? It's those stories that we've found that our audiences really like and appreciate that makes it more accessible. I can give you an example. At the museum, we get a lot of bankers or accountants. I mean, groups who we lovingly refer to as finance bros. These are people who are top in their category of income. They make a lot of money, but they're very smart. But usually the last place that they want to be is at the museum. They're dragged there on a corporate event or on a date. And our guides have found a unique way of engaging with them that involves gossip. The guides will first acknowledge them when they come in, right? They'll say, "Welcome to the museum." They'll say, "The first spot that we're going to go on this tour today is to the most expensive piece of art that the museum has ever paid cash money for."
Got to know your audience, right?
Got to know the audience, exactly, right? And it's those points of accessibility where for them, they start asking, oh, how much was this object, right? And they ask questions about it, and that's a door into the experience for them.
So, Nick, what is one of your favorite salacious backstories in all the different art pieces that you've seen in the past 4 to 5 years with Museum Hack?
Speaking about cash money, the Met paid a lot of money for this tiny little painting by an artist named Duccio. It's about 12 or 13 inches, but it's about the size of an iPad. And they paid a lot for it. In the year 2004, they paid $45 million for this little painting. That's about $1 million per square inch. There was a lot of controversy about it, whether it was real, whether it was fake. This painting had basically been hidden, owned by a private estate owner who decided to sell it and hadn't been available to art historians for 50 years. And the New York Times put out some salacious gossip that it was fake, that the Met got ripped off. I think the Met had to spend considerable sums of money to verify the authenticity for it afterwards. But I like that story. For me, knowing how much the museum paid for it, I started to say, wait, why would they pay so much money for this? Like, what's special about this painting?
Yeah.
And that unlocked it for me.
So what do you think then is the secret sauce for what you're doing there to get people back in it? Is it purely they're having fun again and they're viewing these masters in a different way through a different lens?
I think that having fun at the museum is first and foremost for Museum Hack. We're not trying to be an like education product. We certainly are. We maybe think of ourselves more as like edutainment, but we say fun is the number one variable. And when we're a for-profit business focused on our customer reviews and word of mouth, we think we're laser focused towards creating an awesome experience. So fun for me, first and foremost, you nailed it.
And what have you learned in this process? Because, 5 years ago, your sights weren't on building Museum Hack. Your sights were somewhere else on a date at the Met. What have you learned in this process as now, this business entrepreneur that does have the marketing background, selling aviation products, but now you're, in the museum, the art world. What are your findings?
I've learned so much, and as a business owner, I've certainly made a lot of mistakes, whether it's in hiring or marketing initiatives. I have learned that museums are much more complicated than we may imagine. I've learned that almost all museums, even you in Phoenix, if you went to your museum and just said, hey, I'd love to talk to a curator, I'd love to meet with somebody, they would probably welcome your inquiry. That there are so many great people who work at museums who are dying to have smart, intelligent audiences come and ask those questions. Mm-hmm. And it's been cool for me. I've learned that there's a lot more people out there like me who want to make museums awesome. And I've been doing my best to try to create jobs for them and hire them, give them a home in this spot to reimagine the adult museum experience.
And how many people do you have working for you now? And how many museums are you representing?
We've got about 50 people who work for us now. We have an all fully remote team, and we also have about a dozen contractors. That's why I'm not always clear on our specific numbers. Museums we work with regularly, well, we're in 4 cities right now. New York is our biggest and really continues to be the bulk of where we do a lot of our tours and our money and our staff, but really growing in San Francisco, DC, and Chicago.
Have you been out to Phoenix yet? Have you visited our museums out here?
I have. I spoke to the Phoenix Museum of Art docents about a year ago with my colleague Dustin and learned about all the great work that they're doing. There's another school museum that we're working with there. I think the ASU museum, which is on their campus. Our colleagues have an awesome project with them to attract young people to the museum. And also worked with the Idea Museum, which used to be a children's museum, still sort of is a children's museum, right there in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm. This is great. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about how you're transferring this knowledge into working with companies now, and how you're bringing the museum hack concept and storytelling into the corporate realm. So we'll cover that right after these messages. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here on Business of Story, then you are going to love Definitive, the email from Convince and Convert that many marketers say is the most useful resource around. Each day, the team at Convince and Convert picks a topic and sends you the 3 best resources ever created about that topic. It's topical, it's timely, it's useful, so go to definitivedigest.com and subscribe for free right now. Hey, I've got a question for you. What's the best call to action button color on your website? Yeah, you probably didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, what's the best shape and sizes of your CTA buttons? And what copy gets more clicks? You know, these questions have interrupted my sleep patterns for weeks now, until I downloaded a helpful new email marketing guide from Emma called Why We Click: The Psychology Behind a Great Call to Action. You'll learn how applying just a little bit of brain science can transform your CTA buttons into small but mighty conversion powerhouses. It covers the button color, copy, and placement that helps skyrocket click rates. Check it out at myemma.com/click. You know, Emma helps marketers everywhere send smart, stylish email newsletters, promotions, and automated campaigns, and to help us all rest a little easier knowing our email marketing is doing its job. So check out their new publication at myemma.com/click. You, like all business leaders and communicators, have an important brand story to tell, but it's probably not being heard. There's just too much competition for our attention, unless, of course, you tell a better story. For over a year now, I have connected you with more than 50 international story artists through this podcast to help you craft your ideal brand story for the growth of your enterprise and your people. Did you know I'm also available to you for speaking engagements, brand and leadership story workshops, even for one-on-one Skype or telephone brand story strategy consults? Plus, you can begin clarifying your brand story right now by downloading the interactive DIY workbook at businessofstory.com. You see, your sales don't have to be comedies or tragedies. You can make them epic by clarifying your brand story and connecting with audiences and customers like never before. So download your workbook today at businessofstory.com. And if you're not 100% satisfied, I'll happily refund your money. And one last thought. Just remember, the most potent story you ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a good one, my friends. Story on. Hey, welcome back to Business of Story. And our guest today, the founder of one of the coolest concepts out there I've seen in a long time, Nick Gray with Museum Hack. Nick, it's just really great having you here on Business of Story. Now, you have kind of turned the museum experience on its ear by having fun. By the way, you had said earlier you, like your customers, suffer from ADD, and I would maintain that ADD is now a communicable disease, and we are all the viruses of it. We are constantly overwhelming everybody in our world with too much information. So you guys have found a way to cut through that and get people to really enjoy the museum experience in a fast-paced way and help them find the pieces that really resonate with them. And I imagine help them even dig a little bit deeper on their own if they want to learn more about the artist. Now, I got to believe, because status quo is such a difficult thing to overcome, you guys must have had pushback from other museums of saying, no, we don't do that here. That's just not fancy. That's just not proper. What did you experience and how did you overcome that?
We definitely had pushback. And all I can say is advice for others out there. If we had asked for permission to do any of this, we never would be where we are today. I'm very thankful that today the Metropolitan Museum of Art works with us and we have a great relationship with them. But at the beginning, there were a lot of questions. There was a lot of, you can't do this. And I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Well, did you guys, just take over the museum? You'd show up with a group of 12 people and away you went on your own?
That's pretty much it. I didn't know that we had to register or be official. I'd just have my friends meet me and we'd just go explore the space together. And we would get questions and I would kind of brush them off and not be too serious about it. As the business grew, basically the museum said, look, you're going to run a business out of here. You got to start to play by our rules. And so that was a big, a shock and a wake up.
Okay, so you got to have one story about a docent or somebody, a curator that came up to you and said, no way, arms crossed, get the hell out of my museum, and you had to somehow win them over.
I really feel for the guards in these museums, especially some of the guards on the early days of our tours where, New Yorkers can be feisty and they can be very straightforward and confrontational. And I had one group who was taking a picture, and I think the guard thought that maybe they were doing a video. And it just so happens that photos are allowed, but videos are not allowed. And the guard was very upset. Maybe there was a language problem between us or between them. And the guard, I think, sort of tried to maybe wave off the video or something and accidentally brushed up against, or depending on whose story you believe, maybe it was more of a forceful hand on somebody. And that caused so much drama within both our company and within the museum that was really, really, really unfortunate. And I've had to learn a lot, right? Like as a business owner, as somebody who brings groups into somebody else's space, we've learned to be a lot more respectful of the space. And today, we don't think of ourselves as breaking rules, but we're breaking traditions. Mm-hmm. And an example of that could be that one of my favorite things to do is to go to this room that has this ceiling from this Islamic place in Spain. And we'll lay down on the floor to look up at the ceiling. And that's breaking a tradition, right? It's not against the rules to lay down on the floor, right? Like the little kids do it on their school tours. But to have a bunch of adults go into this one room and lay down on the clean floors and look up at the ceiling, that's just a little weird. It's not breaking rules, but it's breaking the tradition or the convention in your head that says, oh, I don't lay down on the floor. And we do that, and it's awesome with great effects.
Oh, I love that. And, why is that silly? Because we make it silly. It doesn't have to be silly, but I think that's half the fun of what you're doing there. And you are really giving people a very memorable experience. I mean, you're inviting them into the story themselves. So to me, anyway, so much when you're sitting in a museum, it's just like one-way communication. You're sitting there staring at a piece of art. You're not really sure what you're supposed to make of it. It seems good. Seems like you could also have painted it yourself. You don't know. It's worth $3 million. Who knows? But until you get that engagement, like what it sounds like you guys do with Museum Hack, you aren't really a part of that story. You're kind of like a bystander, but it sounds like you guys really fold them into the happenings of the museum.
You nailed it. That's a hugely important thing that my colleague Dustin loves to talk about. I'm probably going to butcher it, but he says, we really believe in making all of our museum visitors active participants in the making of the meaning of their museum story. And what that means is we're not up there lecturing about the art. We're asking questions. We're making it feel like they're involved in it.
I love that. Active participants of the making, in the making of the meaning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and all of us humans, of course, are meaning-making machines, and we use story to do that. So when you go into a museum, it's often just hands off, just look and come up with whatever you want. We were there in New York, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, and we were down at what was it, the Somo Museum of I can't remember. There are so many of them. Anyways. Yeah. They've got this gigantic painting there, and it's just black. And it's just black, and with a black frame. And it's hanging up there. And I swear to God, I'm looking around for Alan Funt and the candid camera cameras. Right. Because I'm like, what the hell? And then I go around the corner, and here's a pitchfork hanging from the ceiling over a hay bale with a chair fold over it. And I'm like, I could do that.
This sounds like you're at the MoMA in Midtown.
That's it. That's what I was thinking. The MoMA. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Somo MoMA. That's how sophisticated I am in all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So now you guys are reaching out in the corporate world. Tell me a little bit about that. What have you learned there in the museums that companies are interested in doing?
This really surprised me. Some of our happiest customers and some of the most growth we're experiencing is from our corporate clients who have businesses who want people to send their employees on a fun team building activity. And they're sending them to Museum Hack, right? They read about us online on TripAdvisor or Yelp. And they said, hey, could we have our company party with you? Could we do something fun with your group? And so we've really started to be successful with that. That's fun and was unanticipated. But even within the last year and a half, people started then then hiring us to do storytelling workshops and sales training seminars to teach their team how to talk about their own products and their company history in the same exciting way that we talk about the museum. So it's been pretty exciting. I can't say the names of a lot of the companies, but I could say some of them. For us, that's fun. It's a whole new way for us to talk about history and businesses. It's great.
Well, this sounds like it's very much of an iterative process for you, starting again 5 years ago from that date to where you are today. And how have you seen storytelling come out of this? It sounds like your enthusiasm has been really the driving force, and then knowledge about the pieces. But have you seen story in its own way kind of get shaped unexpectedly to where you're going with this?
That's a great point. If I had to think 5 years ago that someday my company would be developing new tours and scavenger hunts for Bloomingdale's flagship location in New York City, I never would guess that. We've seen storytelling evolve in that many people are looking for new ways to connect with millennials. And they want something that matters. They want something that's rooted in history or that makes sense, and that's got to have pizzazz, and it's got to be a little sexy. A lot of companies are coming to us to look for those skills. How do we add that to our business? And it's just so dang cool that we get to do that. I'm pumped.
And I got to believe, though, you are attracting a lot more than just millennials as the word gets out about Museum Hack, because the next time I'm in New York, I definitely want to track you guys down and go on one of your tours.
Heck yes. It's not just millennials. It's this millennial mindset, right? Uh-huh. It's people who are part of the ADD generation like me that are very savvy, who want fun and entertainment. For us, that's even bigger. A great example, I talked to a guy. He was about 65 or so. He said he'd retired, and he called me up and he said, "Nick, I got to tell you something." I thought he was going to be pissed. He said, "Nick, I got to tell you, I went on the tour last week, and there is nothing that I hate more than going to museums except for shopping with my wife." And I said, "Oh, wow. All right. I'm sorry to hear that. How was your tour?" He said, "I freaking loved it. I want to buy a season pass. It was the most fun I've ever had." And he came back as like a repeat, but I just thought it was so cool because at that time it was like, wow, I had not anticipated this person liking the tour, and yet he loved it.
Yeah, and I could see where you could use a lot of these same constructs that you've developed for Museum Hack for companies that are giving tours of facilities, and they may have a few more safety concerns in mind.
Exactly.
But, usually you go to these business things and it's and let's end with a PowerPoint.
You're exactly right. That one company that's here in New York hired us to actually help them redo their tour of their headquarters. Think about how many people come visit your office and you give them a little tour. We were able to strategically plant key stories that all their employees were able just to snap up. Easy to tell stories along the tour that laid down a foundation that was the message that they wanted to communicate.
I love that idea of strategically planting stories, because so much in our work, too, is about story spotting, working with brands and saying, all right, you've got your story pulled together, but now let's go spot and capture those stories in the wild that actually support this new brand vision, story, whatever. What kind of prompts do you use to help trigger these stories on tours like that?
Our team works with, whether we're working at a museum and we nerd out with the curators, many museums hire us to train their teams and the methodologies that we've come up with in New York. And the first way when we work with a museum on that is our guides go nerd out with the curators. And at first the curators are like, we don't really trust you. But then once they realize...
Great. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's normal, right? But then once they realize that our team is genuinely curious and good-hearted and interested in this, they go out for beers and we start to hear the real juicy stories that they've never been able to tell or they've been afraid to tell. And so those are things that we try to do through scholarship and through research to figure out a Another example, a luxury hotel here in New York City hired us to help train their staff in some of these stories about the rich history of their building. Their building was about 100 years old in Times Square, the heart of Times Square. It's called the Knickerbocker Hotel. And we were able to pull up these stories that their staff had never heard about before. Things like, the Babe Ruth trade happened in their lobby from the Yankees to the Red Sox, or that probably the martini was invented. No, I'm not sure if it was the martini, some other drink, but amazing stories about this hotel that our team was able to seed into the employee onboarding and training process with their hotel.
And what's so cool about that is not only for the customers, coming through and the audience for that, but the employees themselves get such a rich history and a story to live into that I got to believe it helps in maintaining interest in their jobs, retention of employees, because they feel like they're working now at just not another luxury hotel, but a place of significance, a place, pop culture has emanated from in many important ways.
Heck yes, exactly.
There's a great book you might enjoy. I tracked down my old history professor from Washington State University. His name is Leroy Ashby, and he was one of the best professors I've ever had. I had him on our show a few weeks ago, and Leroy wrote this phenomenal book that I think you guys would like if it's not already in your library, called With Amusement for All. The history of pop culture and entertainment since 1830. So when I first learned about museums as curios, it was from Leroy's book. And he talks very much about what you are talking about. This book, too, is 900 pages long, and it is story after story after story of these different happenings that have really, created the entertainment industry as we know today and pop culture. And Leroy was on just comparing Donald Trump with P.T. Barnum and said, look, they're the same guy. It's just, 160 years later. But you might find it interesting because it talks a lot about the same kinds of things that you guys are doing with Museum Hack and how you are now reaching out into businesses.
Have never heard of that. I just downloaded the Kindle sample. Thank you.
Yeah. Check it out. It's good. Well, great, man. What's next for you guys? Where are you headed after all of this?
We're obsessed with museums. I think that museums are really a special place that adults can go for continuing education, for fun, to learn more about history, or to get inspired by art. And as much as we think we're a big deal, we're really not, right? We're a small business. In the whole world, there's probably 30,000 museums of significant size. And last year, we only worked with 50 of those. So there's a lot more for us to do. I'm focused on trying to grow our team. Right now, we're working on hiring a sales manager, some folks on our marketing team, growth marketers. We're trying to grow it slowly but surely to just unlock the power of museums for all people around the world.
And you went from freaking hating museums to freaking and making them awesome, according to your website. So that's quite a story transformation in its own right.
Thank you.
And you heard it here, folks. Nick's looking for some help out there. So it sounds like a really fun group. Also, go to museumhack.com. He gives a terrific TED talk, a TEDx talk there. Gives you kind of the history and the background. I think that might have been one of the first videos I saw on you guys when someone sent it my way. So it's really been great having you here. Any other place we should send people to learn more about what you do?
Oh, you got to check us out on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, do a search for Museum Hack. Our team shares these funny art memes. They're graphics that you don't have to know about art, but maybe you like. I'll leave it up to you, but just check out Museum Hack on Facebook. We had this thing blow up last week. It was viral, hilarious, had like 1,000 shares. It's good stuff.
We'll have a link to that, too, in our show notes as well. So, hey, Nick, thanks so much for taking the time. I know you're busy back there, probably getting ready for yet another tour, but thank you so much for being on Business of Story.
Thanks for having me. I think museums are freaking awesome.
Next time you're out in Arizona, too, if you're out working down at ASU, please let me know. I'll go buy you a beer and we'll go hit a museum. I'd love to get the tour.
I like the sound of that.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. And thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. If you like what you hear, shoot on over to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a star rating, share it with your friends, family, and help us spread wonderful story artists like Nick with your world. And of course, if you would like some help looking into how to structure and craft your brand story, from the story strategy to the actual activation online and everywhere else, visit me at businessofstory.com. We've got a ton of tools for you to download there. We've got over 80 podcasts for you to listen to and learn from. And it's just my passion. And I suppose it's kind of my museum of storytelling. And so, again, it's great to have you all here. Return again next Monday when we will have another amazing story artist for you. And until that time, have a wonderful life.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business of Story. Don't forget there are terrific free storytelling resources for you at thebusinessofstory.com, where you'll also find the complete show archive. The Business of Story is sponsored by Emma and by Convince and Convert, and is produced by Convince and Convert Media. Find more great shows like The Business of Story at marketingpodcasts.com, the first search engine for marketing podcasts. Podcast imaging by